The silence was the cruelest part. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that fell the moment the doctor announced the time of death, not for our son, but for me. I had been in labor for 10 agonizing hours, a brutal, relentless battle that had pushed my body past its breaking point. I had fought through every contraction, every wave of blinding pain, with a single image in my mind, his face, the face of my husband Mark, whispering, "You can do this, Anna. You're so strong." And I had done it. Our son, Leo, was born, healthy and screaming, a perfect miracle after a decade of heartbreak and failed pregnancies. I was alive. He was alive. We had won, NBUT, as the doctors worked frantically to stop my bleeding, to stitch together the wreckage the delivery had left behind. I saw the look on Mark's face change. The adoration, the concern, it all evaporated, replaced by something I couldn't decipher. It was a cold, calculating distance. He watched them pump blood into my veins, listened to the calm, professional chatter about my remarkable resilience and unbelievable strength. And he didn't move. He didn't hold my hand. He didn't look at our son. When the head surgeon finally wiped his brow and said, "She's stable. She's a fighter. She's going to make it." Mark did something I will never forget. He gave a small, tight nod, not to the doctor, but to himself. He then walked over to the small bassinet where our newborn son was sleeping. He looked down at him for a long, silent moment. He didn't touch him. He didn't even smile. He just looked, as if memorizing a face he never intended to see again. Then he turned to me. I was weak, exhausted, but my heart swelled with love, expecting him to finally come to my side. Instead, he stood at the foot of the bed, his car keys already in his hand. "You're strong, Anna," he said, and the words that had been my fuel for the past 10 hours now sounded like a curse. "You always have been. You don't need me." And with that, he turned and walked out of the delivery room. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye. He just left. He abandoned me in the blood-soaked aftermath of the battle I had fought for us, for the family he claimed he wanted more than anything. He used the very strength he had praised as his permission slip to disappear. My survival wasn't a miracle to him. It was an inconvenience. It was my excuse to be left behind. NIF, your blood is already boiling. You're not alone. Smash that like button and subscribe right now, because you have to see what happens when a woman who was told she was strong enough to be left decides she's strong enough to fight back. This isn't just a story of abandonment. It's a story of what rises from the ruins. And Mark and I were built on a foundation of shared fragility. We met in a support group, a place for people whose lives had been fractured by loss. I was grieving the sudden death of my parents in a car accident. He was mourning the loss of his brother to a long, cruel illness. We found each other in the wreckage, two broken souls who understood the language of grief. Our love story wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a quiet, careful construction of a new life, a shared promise to protect each other from any more pain. Mark was a restorer of antique furniture. He took broken, forgotten things and made them beautiful again. It felt like a metaphor for what he was doing for me. He was gentle, patient, and his hands, which could coax life back into splintered wood, were the safest place I had ever known. "We're the survivors, Anna," he'd whisper, holding me close at night. "We have to stick together. We're all each other has." Our dream was simple, a family. It was a way to fill the echoing silence left by our losses. We wanted the noise, the chaos, the unconditional love that we had both been robbed of. But that dream proved to be as fragile as our pasts. The first miscarriage was a quiet devastation. The second, a year later, was a deeper crack in our carefully constructed world. The doctors couldn't find a reason. Unexplained infertility, they called it, a vague, unsatisfying diagnosis that left us feeling helpless. With each failed attempt, each negative pregnancy test, I saw Mark retreat further into himself. The gentle man I loved began to look at me with a quiet, sorrowful disappointment. He never blamed me, not out loud, but I could feel it in his silences, in the way he'd look at other families in the park with a hunger that bordered on anger. Our shared grief, the very thing that had brought us together, was now a wedge driving us apart. I became the strong one. I had to. I managed the appointments, the injections, the crushing emotional toll of our infertility journey. I researched new treatments, new doctors, clinging to hope with a white-knuckled grip because I could feel him letting go. "I can't take much more of this, Anna," he'd say after another failure. "It's too hard." NSOI bore the weight for both of us. I was the optimist, the fighter, the one who refused to give up. "We'll get through this," I'd tell him, projecting a confidence I didn't always feel. "I'm strong enough for both of us." He seemed to find comfort in that. He'd let me take the lead, let me absorb the pain, his reliance on my strength becoming a core dynamic of our marriage. I thought I was holding us together. I didn't realize I was teaching him that I could function alone. I was building the case for my own abandonment, one resilient act at a time. And after 8 years of trying, we were on our last attempt. We had sunk our life savings and borrowed from my small inheritance into one final round of IVF. It was our Hail Mary, the last-ditch effort before we had to accept a life without the child we so desperately wanted. The pressure was immense. It felt like our entire future, our entire marriage, was riding on the outcome of this one procedure. Mark was more distant than ever during this period. He called it self-preservation. He couldn't handle the hope, he said. It was easier to expect the worst, so I handled it for him. I went to the appointments alone. I administered the painful injections myself, night after night. I talked to the embryo in my mind, willing it to live, to grow, to be the miracle that would save us. When the doctor called with the news, I almost didn't answer. My hand trembled over the phone, my heart pounding with a familiar mix of terror and hope. "Anna," Dr. Evans said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "It worked. You're pregnant. And your levels are fantastic. It's a very strong, very viable pregnancy." And I collapsed onto the floor, sobbing with a relief so profound it was physically painful. I had done it. My body, which had failed me so many times, had finally done it. I couldn't wait to tell Mark, to see the joy on his face, to finally share a victory instead of another loss. And I found him in his workshop, sanding down an old rocking chair. I told him the news, my voice choked with happy tears. He stopped sanding. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Mark, a flash of genuine joy. But it was quickly replaced by something else, fear. "Don't get too excited, Anna," he said, his voice quiet. "It's still early. Anything could happen." NHI's reaction was a splash of ice water. I had expected champagne, celebration, tears of joy. Instead, I got caution and distance, but I refused to let him dim my happiness. "This time is different," I insisted. "I can feel it." He's a fighter. Throughout the pregnancy, he treated me like I was made of glass. He was terrified of another loss, so terrified that he couldn't seem to connect with the reality of the baby. He wouldn't touch my growing belly. He wouldn't come to the ultrasounds. "I'll get attached, and then something will happen," he'd say. "I can't go through that again." NHI's fear manifested as a strange kind of control. He insisted I stop working. He monitored my diet. He hovered, not with loving concern, but with a nervous anxiety that felt suffocating. All the while, I was the one who had to remain calm, strong, and positive. I was the rock, assuring him that everything would be okay, that our son was healthy, that we were going to make it. The irony was that the pregnancy was perfect. Every checkup, every scan showed a healthy, thriving baby boy. My body, for the first time, was doing everything right. I was strong. The baby was strong. But the stronger we got, the more Mark seemed to fade into the background, a ghost in his own life. He was a spectator to the miracle, not a participant. He was watching me be strong, watching me succeed where we had so often failed, and I mistook his silence for awe. I didn't see it for what it was, detachment, NN. The labor started like a whisper and escalated into a roar. It was nothing like the calm, serene water birth we had planned. My water broke. and it was stained with meconium, the baby's first stool, a sign of fetal distress. The dream of a gentle entry into the world vanished, replaced by the harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital's labor and delivery ward. NTHE baby's heart rate was dropping with every contraction. The doctors were calm, but their eyes betrayed their concern. "We need to get him out, Anna," the doctor said, her voice firm. "But your body isn't progressing fast enough. We might have to look at a C-section." "No," I gasped, a primal fear seizing me. I had read everything, and I knew a C-section meant a longer recovery, more risks. I wanted to do this. I needed to prove, maybe to myself more than anyone, that I could. I can do this. Just give me time. Mark was by my side, holding my hand, his face a mask of terror. "Just do what the doctors say, Anna," he pleaded. "Don't be a hero." NBUT. His fear only fueled my resolve. I looked at him, my vision blurring with sweat and tears. "I am strong enough, Mark. We are strong enough." NFOR. The next 10 hours, I fought. It was a war waged within the battlefield of my own body. The pain was a living entity, a monster that tried to swallow me whole. But with every wave, I focused on my son. I focused on Mark's hand in mine. His voice became my mantra. "You're so strong, Anna. You're amazing." He was my coach, my cheerleader, my reason to keep pushing through the agony. NTHE doctors watched, amazed. I was enduring pain levels that should have been impossible. I was forcing my body to do what it was reluctant to do, through sheer force of will. At hour 8, the baby's heart rate plummeted. The room filled with nurses. An oxygen mask was strapped to my face. The doctor's voice was urgent. "Anna, we have to go." Now, in BUT, as they were prepping me for the emergency surgery, I felt a shift, a final, desperate surge of energy. "He's coming!" I screamed. I can feel it. NTHE last few minutes were a blur of controlled chaos. I pushed with a strength I didn't know I possessed, a raw, animalistic power born of desperation and love. And then he was out, a sudden, shocking release. The room was filled with the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, the loud, furious cry of my son. They placed him on my chest, slippery and perfect. I was sobbing, laughing, completely overwhelmed. "We did it, Mark," I cried, looking for my husband. "We did it." And that's when I saw it, the change. As the medical team turned their attention to me, to the alarming amount of blood I was losing, Mark's role as my cheerleader ended. He stepped back from the bed. He watched them work on me, his face unreadable. He heard them praise my strength, my endurance, my will to live, and in his eyes I saw a decision being made. It was as if my victory had severed the final thread that connected us. My strength hadn't just saved our son. It had given him an exit ramp. NNTHE, first 24 hours after Mark left, were a surreal nightmare. I kept expecting him to walk back through the door, his face etched with regret, a bouquet of cheap hospital flowers in his hand. I told myself he had just panicked. The birth was traumatic. He needed some air. He would be back. NTHE nurses were kind, their pity a gentle but constant reminder of my new reality. They'd come in to check on me and Leo, their eyes flicking to the empty chair by my bed, their smiles a little too bright. "Has your husband called?" they'd ask, trying to sound casual. Each time, I had to shake my head, the shame a hot flush creeping up my neck, and I called his phone a dozen times. It went straight to voicemail. I called his workshop. No answer. I called his friends, my voice trembling as I tried to explain the unexplainable. "He just left? After the baby was born?" They'd ask, their disbelief mirroring my own. No one had seen him. No one had heard from him. He had vanished. NTHE hospital social worker, a woman named Grace, came to see me on the second day. She had a kind face, but eyes that had seen too much. She didn't offer false hope. She offered practical advice. She helped me call my landlord. She helped me figure out how to get a copy of the birth certificate without the father's signature. She treated my abandonment not as a shocking tragedy, but as a logistical problem to be solved. NTHE day I was discharged was the loneliest day of my life. A nurse pushed me in a wheelchair, a tiny, sleeping Leo in my arms. As we passed rooms filled with beaming couples and proud grandparents, I felt a sense of shame so profound it was suffocating. I had walked into this hospital as a wife, full of hope. I was leaving as a statistic, a single mother, a story the nurses would tell for years to come. A taxi dropped me off at our apartment, the home we had so carefully prepared for our son. The rocking chair Mark had been restoring sat in the corner of the nursery, half finished. His clothes were gone from the closet. His toothbrush was gone from the bathroom. The only thing he had left behind was a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was just 2 lines written in his familiar, neat script. "Nana, you were right. You are strong enough. I'm not. I'm sorry." And that was it. 10 years of love, of shared grief and fragile hope, erased by 2 sentences. He wasn't sorry for leaving. He was sorry he wasn't as strong as me. He had twisted my resilience into a weapon and used it to cut himself free. He didn't leave me because I was weak. He left me because my strength made him feel weak. And in that moment, sitting in the silent apartment with my newborn son, my grief began to curdle into a cold, hard rage. In NTHE, first few months were a blur of survival. I was running on fumes, fueled by caffeine and a primal instinct to keep my son alive. The loneliness was a physical presence, a heavy weight in the small apartment. Every creak of the floorboards, every cry from the bassinet was a reminder of Mark's absence. NMY grief was complicated. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my husband. I was mourning the man I thought he was. The gentle, caring soul I had met in that support group was gone, replaced by a coward who had abandoned his child in his first hour of life. The betrayal was so deep, so complete, it felt impossible to overcome. In BUT, then I would look at Leo. I would look at his tiny, perfect face, his small hands gripping my finger, and I knew I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. My strength, the very thing Mark had used as his excuse to leave, was now the only thing I had left. NMY First Ally was my landlady, a tough, no-nonsense widow named Mrs. Gable. She had heard what happened and showed up at my door with a casserole and a check for my security deposit. "You'll need this more than I do," she said, waving away my protests. "And don't you worry about next month's rent. We'll figure it out. Men are fools. We women, we survive." NMY Second Ally came from the past. My parents, before they died, had been part of a close-knit community of artists and craftspeople. I reached out to one of them, an old woodworker named Ben, who had been my father's best friend. I told him what happened, my voice breaking over the phone. NTWO days later, he was at my door. He took one look at my exhausted face, the unfinished rocking chair, and the stacks of unpaid bills on the counter. "Right," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's get to work." And Ben became my lifeline. He helped me set up an online shop to sell the small, carved wooden toys my father had taught me to make. He spread the word through his network. "This is for Anna," he told them. "She's one of ours." And as slowly, a new community began to form around me. It wasn't the family I had dreamed of, but it was a family nonetheless. It was Mrs. Gable bringing me groceries. It was Ben watching Leo so I could work for a few hours. It was other artisans sending me supplies, offering advice, and sharing my little online shop with their followers. NTHE business, born of desperation, began to grow. I called it Leo's Workshop. I poured all my pain, my anger, and my love into my work. Each piece I carved, each toy I sanded and painted was an act of defiance. It was my own restoration project. I wasn't just restoring wood, I was restoring myself. I was proving him wrong. My strength wasn't a reason to be abandoned. It was my greatest asset, and I was just beginning to realize how powerful it could be. And in a year after Mark left, my small online business had become a modest success. I was paying my bills. Leo was thriving. I was finding a new rhythm, a new sense of peace. I had almost convinced myself that Mark was a ghost, a chapter that was closed forever. And then I got a letter. It was from a lawyer. Mark was filing for divorce, and he was suing for sole custody of our son. NTHE legal jargon was cold and clinical, but the message was clear. He claimed I was emotionally unstable, that my obsession with having a child had created a toxic environment, and that he had left for his own mental health and safety. He was now claiming that he was the stable parent, the one who could provide a better life for the son he had abandoned at birth. He had a new job, a new partner, and a new narrative where he was the victim. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for a year erupted. This was a new level of cruelty, a new depth of betrayal. He wasn't just a coward. He was a thief, trying to steal the one good thing in my life. NMY lawyer, a young, fierce woman paid for by a legal aid fund Ben had helped me secure, was livid. "He's trying to rewrite history," she said, her eyes flashing. "He thinks because he has money and a new life, he can just erase what he did. We're not going to let him." NTHE legal battle was brutal. His lawyers tried to paint me as a hysterical, broken woman. They used my grief over my parents, my history of infertility, everything, against me. They tried to argue that my strength during labor was a sign of a manic episode. NBUT, we had the truth. We had the testimony of the nurses and the doctor from the delivery room. We had the note he left behind. And I had my own story. When I took the stand, I wasn't the fragile, grieving woman they described. I was a mother. I was a business owner. I was a survivor. I looked at Mark, who refused to meet my eyes, and I told the court everything. I told them about his fear, his distance, and his final, cruel words. "He didn't leave because I was weak," I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the silent courtroom. "He left because I was strong. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a patient. The moment I proved I didn't need to be saved, I became disposable to him. A man who runs away when a child is born is not a father. He is a coward. And a coward has no right to the son he never had the courage to hold." NTHE final piece of evidence was a surprise, even to me. Ben, my father's old friend, took the stand. He told the court about a conversation he'd had with Mark months before Leo was born. "Mark told me he was terrified," Ben said, his voice heavy with sadness. He said, "What if she and the baby are fine? What if they don't need me? Everyone thinks she's so strong. It's too much pressure. I don't know if I can live up to that." And it was the nail in the coffin. It proved his abandonment wasn't a moment of panic. It was a premeditated escape plan, contingent on my survival. NTHE judge's decision was swift and scathing. She granted the divorce, but she denied his custody claim in the strongest possible terms, calling his actions a profound and unforgivable dereliction of parental duty. He was granted supervised visitation once a month, but he never showed up. He vanished again, this time for good. And winning the court case wasn't a celebration. It was a closing of a door, a final, definitive end to a painful chapter. The real victory was the life I was building. A life that had nothing to do with Mark and Leo's workshop continued to grow. What started on my kitchen table moved to a small rented space, and then to a full-fledged workshop with a small staff of other single mothers I had hired. We weren't just making toys. We were building a community, a place of support and flexible work for women who were trying to rebuild their lives. And a few years later, I bought a small house on a hill overlooking the town. It had a big yard for Leo to play in, and a large garage that I converted into my dream workshop. It was a house bought not with a husband's money, but with my own 2 hands, with the strength he had so carelessly thrown away. And one sunny afternoon, I was sitting on my porch, watching a now 7-year-old Leo hammering away at a small block of wood, a perfect imitation of me. He was a kind, bright, and happy boy, full of life and laughter. He looked up at me, his face serious. "Mom," he asked, "why doesn't my dad ever visit?" And I had been dreading this question, but I had promised myself I would always tell him the truth in a way he could understand. I sat down on the steps beside him. "Your dad," I began, choosing my words carefully, "was very scared when you were born." Sometimes, when people are scared, they make bad decisions. They run away from things, even wonderful things. "But you weren't scared," he said, looking at me with a child's simple, profound wisdom. And I smiled, my heart aching with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "Oh, honey, I was terrified. But you were worth being brave for." NHE seemed to accept that, turning his attention back to his block of wood. I watched him, my son, my miracle, the center of my universe. Mark had walked out of that hospital room thinking he was leaving me with nothing. He thought my strength was a burden that set him free. He was so wrong. My strength wasn't a burden, it was a seed. And from the barren ground of his abandonment, it had grown into a life more beautiful and more resilient than I could have ever imagined. He hadn't left me to be alone. He had left me to be free.